Sometimes a handheld comes along like this RG Rotate by Anbernic that I just have to try out, promising a gimmick that sounds fun and bad at the same time. But you might now wonder, is it any good? Well, that is what I'm here to find out. First, what do you even get with the RG Rotate? Specs wise, you get a Unisoc Tiger T618 CPU with a Mali G52 GPU, 3 gigs of RAM and 32 gigs of ROM, support for a microSD card up to 2 TB, a 3.5-inch laminated IPS touchscreen at 720 by 720p, Android 12 supporting Wi-Fi 5 and Bluetooth 5.0, a 2000 mAh LiPo battery, a high-fidelity stereo speaker, an AI assistance, USB-C DAC to 3.5mm headphone jack, and a few other things like 6-axis gyro, over-the-air upgrades, vibration, etc. All of this can be had in silver and black. Be aware though that for some reason the silver model is fully aluminum while the black model had an ABS bottom and an aluminum top. There are two claims however that stick out a bit to me. First is the stereo speaker. There's clearly only one speaker hole, and when testing it, that is also the only place where the sound comes out of. So are there two speakers inside that go to the same place? Or do they mean it's capable to output stereo over headphones or something? Then the other one is the USB-C DAC thing. The way I would interpret that is that it can be used as a DAC, like as an example the Snow Sky Echo Nano here, which I reviewed recently, but that doesn't make sense as the RG Rotate has not a headphone jack anywhere. So what I think they might mean is that the USB-C port on top here just supports one of these USB-C to headphone jack adapters here. It's just a weird way that it's featured so prominently on the website. Then in the box, you get the handheld itself, a USB-A to C cable, a screen protector, which I just wish they would have applied out of the factory, a lanyard, raised shoulder buttons, which you can swap out for the normal ones, and of course a manual. Then I'm getting to my first impressions, where I already noticed a few things I do like and a few things I don't. Overall, the main thing about this handheld, the rotating screen, feels pretty smooth, both hardware and software wise, as the OS seems to respond well to it. That being said, I'm somewhat worried. First, when you open the screen, it feels like it just comes to a stop without any cushioning, metal on metal. I don't think this will be an issue, but it makes it just not as thought out to me. But what concerns me more is just how much wiggle room the hinge itself has. Not only does this cause easy access for things like dirt and sand, but I also feel like if you drop it on the opposing side of the hinge, that it could just bend or pop out even. Added to that, I have to wonder how this will hold up over a longer period of time. Will this hinge loosen and the wiggle become even worse? Only time will tell. Then another gripe of mine is the grip itself. Because of how the console works, the D-pad and buttons are below the body's center. Because of that, I can't find a good way to hold it when I need to also use the shoulder buttons. That doesn't feel at least a little bit uncomfortable. This could be because I have small hands, but a good example here is actually the Game Boy Advance SP, as it is similar sized, and I can establish a comfortable grip thanks to the buttons being above the body center. It might be something I can get used to, but out of the box, it's not the greatest. The buttons themselves though feel pretty nice, tactile, and have just the right amount of travel. Then the speaker is a speaker. It serves its job. It doesn't have much dimension and feels somewhat flat. Added to that is the placement on the back, which I'm just not the biggest fan of. Like, I'm in this direction and the speaker is in the exact opposite one, so I would recommend using headphones. Then the last thing I want to cover here is the screen. This 720 by 720 screen is great. It's high-res enough to allow for a clean image, and it is helped by the fact that it's just a nice screen to begin with. The colors pop nicely, and the side-to-side viewing angles are great. That being said, the up and down viewing angles are not the worst, but they are noticeable, especially when you use the device in its closed mode, as up and down now becomes left and right. This is of course not a common use case, but something you might want to consider. Let's now get into actually gaming on the RG Rotate. First, I want to mention that you can of course use a Bluetooth controller when playing newer consoles, but I want to touch the RG Rotate as a standalone device. Just keep that in mind while I talk about some of the problems. Like most modern handhelds, there are a bunch of systems that run great and don't need much talking about in my opinion. Your NES, SNES, different Game Boys, PlayStation 1, and so on. They run perfectly, and your only problem might be some PS1 games that need the joystick, but that's about it. If this is the primary area that you focus on, then this handheld is great, especially since most of these also fit well within the 1:1 aspect ratio of the RG Rotate. Then next I get to the Nintendo DS. It runs great, it honestly does, and I think that it is a surprisingly good fit for the RG Rotate. That is as long as you don't need both screens at the same time, as having both on there feels a little bit cramped. My preferred setup is to have one big screen and one small screen. This way you can still see some of the information if you need to. Then I get to the Nintendo 64, which in itself runs great. I really didn't notice any problems performance-wise. That being said, here's where the problems with this handheld begin. The RG Rotate has no sticks, as you might have noticed. As such, you have two choices. You either use the function to map the left stick to the D-pad, which can work for some games, or you do some weird hybrid shit where you use the touch capabilities for the stick. With Mario Kart as an example, I found it easier to use the D-pad, as using the screen was too inaccurate. Staying with one-stick consoles, I now get to the Dreamcast, which runs good as well, even if I did notice some visual bugs here and there. I will however chalk this up to the core that Anbernic uses by default and not something that the handheld causes. But just like with the N64, you just kinda have to experiment with the games that you play. For some, mapping the joystick might work, some can be played with the D-pad, and for the rest you'll probably need to make use of the screen as well. Then the PSP continues this trend, but now with the added problem of it being a widescreen console. While the games look good on the screen, it is not the most comfortable way to play PSP, as the screen is quite tiny and you have big borders on the top and on the bottom. Despite that though, I was impressed with how well it handled PSP. Even a heavier title like God of War is running pretty well on here. Then the 3DS, I feel like it could almost work. It really is on the cusp of running, and you might get it playable with some speed hacks, but even then it will depend on the kind of game you play. A Pokemon, Fire Emblem, or just a random JRPG could work, but don't expect to play something like Mario or Xenoblade. Now getting to the last two consoles I want to specifically point out is the Gamecube/Wii with Dolphin. Performance wise, it is almost there. Some games like Mario Kart, it seems to be almost able to run, with some 10 to 20% slowdowns here and there. While something like Eternal Darkness is at a permanent 50%-ish of its original speed. Also, I did notice that Dolphin on this emulator seems to struggle with the graphics as well, which I haven't seen before. So even if you find a game that works well on this handheld, you might want to uninstall Anbernic's provided version of Dolphin and install your own. Then at last I get to the PS2, which unsurprisingly does not run at a playable state. And even if it would run, the 2-stick requirement is a big deal breaker here. So as a whole, when it comes to emulation, you get the same old roster that many handhelds serve, with the downside that you don't even have a stick for a good chunk of them. As such, you will be quite limited in what you play on quite a few systems. But don't forget, this is running Android. As such, you do have access to native games as well. Performance there will depend quite a bit on the games themselves, so it's hard to say that it runs certain games well. I would say, however, that it is on the low to mid side of performance. This sounds good at first, especially as there are a lot of good ports on Android, but you will quickly run into two big problems: the screen and the controls. First, the screen, as games will either stick to an aspect ratio between 16:9 and 21:9, or they will try to resize themselves to the 1:1 aspect ratio, which causes the UI of most games to become either too small, stretched, or makes it overlap with other elements. Then with controls, it's always a hit or miss on Android if a controller is supported or if it's touch only. So especially because of the screen, native gaming becomes a big miss for me. At this point I could get to streaming, which it does work, but you have the same downsides with the controllers and the weird screen aspect ratio that most games don't cover. Before the conclusion, I also want to quickly get to the software side of things. Starting out is the Gamehub that Anbernic uses. You get to it by holding the small button on the side here. It overall works quite nicely, but I had some trouble to get the games to load at first. You can press X for it to scan the SD card, but this gave me limited to no results. As such, I found it easier to just set the location of every console manually. It's not a big deal, but I feel like this is something that should be pretty autonomous in the current year. Other than that, it is very simple and comparable to other launchers I've seen. A small thing that stood out to me though is the setting to turn on overlays, which is under Tools. It worked for every console that Anbernic runs through RetroArch, and it hides the black bars very well. Sure, I could do this myself, but it's nice when I don't have to. Then I get to the AI assistant that they proudly advertise. Anbernic has not been spared from shoving AI into everything, but let's see if it's any good. In the app, you have an AI square with a few options. Slightly under half of the screen is an ad for other Anbernic handhelds. Then you get text to picture, which sometimes produces alright results, but feels a few years out of date in my opinion. Then you have Fix High Photo, where you add a picture and tap on Fix Photo. That's it. At least for me, it was just spinning endlessly. Okay, next, Fix Old Photo. This worked, but seems to just badly upscale the image. Also, it has this weird tendency to change colors for no reason. After that comes Repaint Portrait, which you can imagine what it does from the name. It also works, but just feels like some of the early tech demos that we've seen with AI. Next up is Learning and Education. You essentially send a picture of a problem and let the AI solve and explain it. Every time I tried it though, it just gave me a service busy message. The last one in the AI square is the Soul Partner, your very own AI gamer girlfriend that even talks to you. Sadly, she never responded, getting stuck on Partner Process. Now, I don't want to cheat on my new Anbernic GF, but at this rate, it is faster to just open GameFAQs. Okay, let's leave the square and create a new session. Service busy null. Okay, I see. Great. The last two AI things are Translate Area and GameSnap. The Translate Area thing could be quite interesting to play games that haven't been translated yet. Or if the text contains a word you don't understand, as an example if English isn't your native language. As cool as the idea sounds though, I can only say that it falls on its face. The translation is hit or miss, the overlay is ugly, and you constantly need to tell it to retranslate, which makes it slower than it already is. You certainly won't be going through a full game this way. And then lastly is the GameSnap, a small tool that takes a screenshot of what currently is on screen and explains it to you. A neat idea for things like asking what a new enemy in a game does, or where in the game you are stuck at, but even here it is widely inaccurate. All in all, it feels like AI for the sake of adding AI. It is completely outdated, slow, and doesn't even work 100% of the time. If you need any AI tools, then there's a better alternative for all of these available. And with that, I'm getting to the conclusion. I really don't know who this handheld is for. Like sure, the things it runs great, but is the gimmick enough to justify the experience? For the form factor, you better get one of the SP type of handhelds. For the Android ecosystem, you could rather get a Retroid or a Mongme. The only thing making the RG Rotate stand out is its gimmick. Considering everything, I can say that it does its job well enough, and I don't think that you will be disappointed if you set your expectations to the right level. But if you already have another handheld, then there's no point to switching to this one. And even if you don't have one yet, Anbernic sells you others that are just as good, for cheaper. After all this, if you still want to get one, I've put the links in the pinned comment and description below. But me personally, I will probably sell mine off again. And if there are other handhelds you want me to take a look at, then just let me know in the comments as well. Next up is learning and education.